The stable door was already latched when Eli Mercer stepped inside, and the latch wasn't on his side of the wood. It was on the outside. That detail hit him first, sharp and wrong. Before his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and before the heat and dust settled into his lungs like something meant to stay. The barn smelled of sweat, old hay, and horses that had been standing too long without a hand to steady them. Sunlight pushed through the cracks in the boards in thin, angled blades, as if the day itself didn't want to enter fully. Eli had come to the Whitfield place for a bay gelding, nothing more. Just a quiet deal between two men who knew each other well enough to keep their words short and their eyes sharp. He'd traded with Silas Whitfield before, played cards with him at Long Branch, watched him win and lose and laugh the same way either outcome, like the world was always the one paying the price. But the moment Eli stepped into that stable, it didn't feel like he'd walked into a negotiation. It felt like he'd walked into a secret. He saw the horses first, shifting in their stalls, ears pinned, eyes rolling white at the edges, as if they'd been listening to something human for too long. Then he saw the iron ring bolted into the wall at waist height. Old iron, scarred, polished in spots from use. A short length of chain lay curled in the straw below it. Not long enough to restrain a horse, long enough to restrain a person. Eli's throat tightened, not from dust, but from the feeling that he'd stepped 1 inch too far into a life he didn't have permission to witness. Then he saw her. She sat on the straw in the far corner of the stall, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins. She wore a torn shirt that looked like it had once belonged to a man, the fabric hanging loose and filthy, barely covering what it needed to. Her legs were bare, streaked with dirt, and bruises bloomed across her skin in shades that told a story without words. Yellowing old pain, purple new pain, the kind of pain that didn't ask permission. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't move. But when Eli's shadow fell across her, she flinched just enough that he saw it. An involuntary brace. The body's quiet surrender to what it expects next. Eli took off his hat slowly, not as manners, as a signal. He lowered it to his chest like it weighed something. He kept his voice low. "Hey." Her eyes flicked to him, then away, then back again, like she was trying to solve a riddle with too little time. He noticed the skin around her wrist, raw. Not fresh blood, but rubbed down to tenderness, the kind of injury that comes from repetition, from a chain that never jerks hard enough to break bone, but never loosens enough to let the body forget it's there. On the wooden post beside her were 3 shallow cuts, deliberate, evenly spaced, not random scratches from a bored hand. These were marks. Eli crouched near the stall door, but didn't cross the threshold. He stayed where she could see the space between them. He nodded toward the marks. "Those yours?" Her lips parted. Her voice came out broken, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Morning, midday, night. 3 times. Eli stared at the marks again, and his stomach turned as if it had recognized something it didn't want to name. "Your father?" he asked. She nodded once, barely. Then she added, in a whisper that sounded like someone reciting weather, "He drinks. Then he locks it. Then he comes back." Eli felt heat rise in his chest. Not the barn's heat. Something older and darker. He tried to swallow it down. Tried to be a man who could think clearly. But shame hit him next, heavier than anger. Because he knew Silas Whitfield. He knew the way Silas talked about women when he'd had a little too much whiskey. He knew the way Silas talked about raising and keeping order. He knew the way Silas would smile when someone else got uncomfortable, like discomfort was proof he had the stronger stomach. And still, Eli had never imagined this. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. Eli didn't turn his head, but he felt the shift in the air, the way the barn seemed to hold its breath. The girl's shoulders tightened, not with fear, with timing, like the clock inside her had started ticking again. Silas Whitfield appeared in the doorway, carrying a metal bucket, sweat darkening his shirt, whiskey riding his breath even in daylight. He stopped when he saw Eli inside. For half a second, surprise flickered in his eyes. Then it disappeared behind a practiced look of casual annoyance, the same look a man wears when he's been caught with cards up his sleeve. "Well now," Silas said, setting the bucket down slow. "Eli Mercer, didn't hear you ride in." Eli straightened, hat still in his hand. He shifted so his body blocked the stall from Silas's view. Silas' gaze narrowed. "You looking for the gelding?" Eli kept his voice steady. "I was." Silas shrugged like the world was simple. "He's fine. Out back. I'll show you." Eli didn't move. Silas's eyes flicked past him, trying to see inside. Eli stepped a half-inch to stop it. "She's latched in," Eli said. Silas's mouth twitched as if he'd tasted something bitter. "She runs. I keep her close." "That's a chain," Eli said quietly. Silas' shoulders lifted like it was nothing. "That's discipline." Behind Eli, the girl didn't speak. She didn't plead. She didn't defend herself. She sat perfectly still, as if she'd learned long ago that words only made it worse. Silas leaned on the doorframe. "She gets dramatic in the heat," he said. "Girls do. Gets ideas. Thinks she's grown. Thinks she can talk her way out of a father's rules." Eli felt his hands tighten around his hat brim. He let out a slow breath. He could leave. He could buy the gelding, get back on his horse, ride home, tell himself it wasn't his business. He could tell himself the law would handle it if it ever needed handling. He could tell himself that in Ford County, a man's home was his own, and a daughter under his roof was still under his shadow. He could do all that, and he could also live with the fact that he'd seen 3 marks on a post and walked away. Eli had done that once before in his life, walked away from something ugly because it was easier than stepping into it. He'd watched a drunk man ruin a woman's spirit while everyone pretended it was just family trouble. He'd carried that quiet cowardice for years. He wasn't carrying it again. He lifted his eyes to Silas. "I'll take the gelding," he said, "and I'll hire her to come back with me. I need an extra hand for the drive." Silas's expression changed fast, like a door slamming. "She ain't for hire." "She ain't livestock," Eli replied. For a heartbeat, the stable went silent, except for a horse shifting in its stall. Silas's jaw flexed. "You don't get to walk onto my land and decide what my family is." Eli held his ground. "I'm not deciding. I'm offering." Silas's eyes glittered. "You're judging." Eli didn't deny it. That was what made Silas move. He lunged, whiskey and spite and shame turning his body into a weapon. The first punch clipped Eli in the shoulder. The second came for his jaw. Eli stepped inside the swing, caught Silas by the shirt collar, and drove him backward into the stable wall, hard enough to make dust fall from the rafters. A horse kicked its stall, panicked. Silas swung wild, trying to regain his pride. Eli kept it tight and controlled. One punch into Silas' ribs, one shove into a feed barrel. Silas stumbled, coughing, blood brightening his lip. In the chaos, the girl moved. Not like a heroine, like a survivor. She didn't run past them. She didn't scream for help. She reached toward the outer latchkey hanging from a nail just inside the doorway. Something Silas must have left there out of habit. Snatched it and threw it toward Eli without a word. Eli caught it. Silas turned, realized, and surged forward. Eli moved faster. He unlocked the stall door. The metal clicked loud in the heat. The door swung open. The girl stayed where she was for a second, as if she didn't trust it. Eli spoke softly. "Come on." Her eyes flicked to Silas. Silas's face was twisted, not with fatherly anger, but with possession being threatened. Eli stepped between them. "If I hear you've locked her in again," Eli said, voice low and deadly calm, "I'll come back with the law, and I won't come alone." Silas spat blood into the straw. His eyes stayed cold. "You don't know what you're doing." Eli didn't answer, because maybe he didn't. Maybe stepping into this meant stepping into something bigger than bruises and chains, but he knew what he couldn't do. He couldn't step back out and pretend. Minutes later, Eli's wagon rolled away from the Whitfield place, wheels groaning over dry dirt. The girl sat beside him, wrapped in an old canvas coat Eli had thrown over her shoulders. Her hair was tangled. Her hands were clenched in her lap like prayer without words. She didn't look back. But Eli did, just once. Silas stood in the yard watching them go, and the look on his face wasn't rage. It was calculation. The kind of man who loses a fistfight and wins with paper. The kind of man who knew the law better than he respected it. As the distance grew, Eli felt the weight of the choice settle in, because now there was a question riding beside them, heavier than the girl herself. When a man finds a young woman chained in a stable by her own father, does he follow the law, or break it first and pray the law catches up later? The girl spoke after the first mile, voice so quiet Eli almost thought the wind had made it. "My name is Clara," she said. Eli nodded. "Eli." She stared ahead at the road. "He's gonna come." Eli didn't tell her he wouldn't. He didn't offer promises he couldn't guarantee. He just said, "Not tonight." They crossed the Arkansas River at a shallow bend where the stones made the wagon wheels grind slow. The water was low and warm, reflecting the sky like dull metal. Clara watched the river like it was something holy, something that couldn't be owned, couldn't be latched, couldn't be chained. By late afternoon, Eli's ranch came into view. Low buildings against a wide, empty Kansas sky. Fences stretching out like lines drawn by someone with patience. Clara didn't relax when she saw it. She didn't smile. She watched it like a place that could still turn into a trap if she trusted too soon. Eli understood. Safety wasn't a place. It was time without harm, and time was the thing she'd stopped believing in. He gave her a tin cup of water before he said anything else. "You're safe here," he told her again. She nodded, but her eyes stayed distant, like she was counting hours she didn't want to count. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, Clara stiffened. Eli noticed immediately. It wasn't random fear. It was scheduled fear. He didn't mention it. Instead, He handed her a bucket of feed and nodded toward the horse stalls. "Help me," he said. Not as an order, as a way to keep her moving. They carried feed together. Slow, steady. The horses snorted and shifted, curious at the new presence. Clara moved carefully, like she didn't trust her body to belong to her again. When the sun finally disappeared and no door opened, no boots crunched on gravel, no latch clicked from the outside, Clara's shoulders lowered a fraction. Not trust, not peace, but a crack in the fear. That night, Eli slept with his rifle near the door and his boots on. Not because he expected a shootout, because he expected a man like Silas to choose whatever weapon fit the moment. And Silas's best weapon wasn't a gun. It was the story he could tell in town. The next morning, Eli rode into Dodge City early, dust rising behind his horse like smoke. Sheriff Tom Callahan was in his office with his boots on the desk, hat tipped back. He looked up when Eli entered, expression unreadable. Before Eli could speak, Tom nodded toward a stack of papers. "You're early," Tom said. "So is trouble," Eli replied. Tom leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Silas Whitfield was here at dawn. Eli felt his stomach drop, even though he'd expected it. Tom slid one paper forward. Complaint, kidnapping, assault, theft. Eli stared at the paper like it was a snake. Tom watched him carefully. "I'm not saying you did it. I'm saying he filed it." Eli kept his voice low. "He had her chained." Tom's jaw tightened. "He says she's unstable. Says she runs. Says you took advantage." Eli felt anger flare, but he forced it down. Anger made men stupid in rooms like this. Tom leaned forward. "Here's the part that worries me." He tapped the paper. "Silas says she signed something. Says she agreed to it." "Signed what?" Eli asked. Tom didn't answer with words. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded document. He laid it on the desk, smoothed it flat. A land transfer. A deed. Clara Whitfield's name at the bottom. Eli's throat tightened. "Her mother's land," he murmured, recognizing the description. River parcel. Small but valuable. The kind of property that could keep a man afloat if his debts were dragging him under. Tom nodded slowly. "Silas says she signed it freely." Eli looked at the signature again. It wasn't a flourish. It was shaky, like a hand forced to move. Tom's voice dropped. "In this county, fathers carry weight, and paper carries more." Eli felt the truth of that like a bruise. He could protect Clara from fists for a night, but paper could reach farther than any fist. Tom sighed. "Bring her in. I need to hear it from her. Otherwise, this turns into your word against his, and Eli. You know how that tends to go." Eli nodded. He knew. He also knew Silas would be preparing his next move. When Eli returned to the ranch that afternoon, Clara was standing by the fence watching the horizon. Not because she liked the view, because she was listening for dust. Eli tied his horse and walked toward her. Before he could speak, she whispered, "He won't stop." In the distance, down the road from Dodge City, a thin line of dust rose into the summer sky. 3 riders, just like she'd predicted. She didn't run. That was the part that chilled Eli most. She went still, like someone who'd learned that running only delayed the inevitable. Eli stepped onto the porch and rested one hand on the fence rail, forcing himself to breathe slow. Silas rode in front, posture rigid, face set. Two men rode behind him. Saloon men, favor men, the kind who'd take a job for whiskey or loyalty, or the promise of being on the right side of a story. No badge, no sheriff. This wasn't law. This was intimidation. They pulled up hard in the yard. Dust swirled around their horses' legs. Silas swung down, boots hitting dirt like a claim. "You got something that belongs to me," he called out. Eli didn't raise his voice. "She ain't a saddle." One of the other men spat. "This don't need to get ugly." It was already ugly. Clara stepped onto the porch behind Eli, not hiding, not begging. Silas's eyes flicked to her, and for a brief moment his expression shifted. Not fatherly concern, control slipping. "You think he'll keep you?" Silas snapped at her. "You think this old rancher wants your trouble? You think he's doing this for kindness?" Eli didn't turn around. He spoke to Silas. "Sheriff knows where she is. We can ride into Dodge City. Settle it proper." Silas laughed, but it didn't sound like humor. "Settle it here." He stepped forward. The fight came fast. No theatrics, no warning. Silas shoved Eli hard, trying to throw him off balance. One of the hired men started circling wide toward the porch, eyes on Clara like she was property. Eli moved first. He drove his shoulder into Silas, sending both of them into the dirt. Dust exploded around them. Silas swung wild, nails scraping, fists landing where they could. Eli fought steady, not because he wanted to. Because if he lost control, the men behind Silas would use it as excuse. Eli landed one punch clean enough to split Silas' lip. Another knocked him back. Silas coughed, blood bright at the corner of his mouth. Clara grabbed a fence post and shouted, "Stop!" Her voice rang out across the yard, sharp and strong. The voice of someone who'd finally decided silence was worse. The hired men hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Silas lay on his back, staring up at the sky like it owed him something. "You don't understand," he muttered, voice rough. Eli held him down with a knee in his chest. "Then explain." Silas's eyes flicked toward Clara, and Eli saw it. Silas realized he'd said too much by the way his mouth tightened. "She signed it," Silas muttered again. Eli froze. "Signed what?" Silas's breath hitched. The hired men exchanged a look, and in that 1 second, the entire shape of the situation changed. This wasn't about discipline. This wasn't about a runaway daughter. This was about land. And land could start wars in Kansas quicker than whiskey ever could. Silas shoved Eli off with a sudden burst of strength, stood, wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "This ain't over," he said, voice low. "You want law? Fine. Let's bring it to town." He mounted without another word. The 3 riders turned their horses and rode back toward Dodge City, dust rising behind them like a threat. Clara stepped down from the porch slowly. Her hands shook now, but her chin stayed lifted. "He made me sign something," she whispered. Eli stared at her. "Was it the deed?" Clara swallowed. "I didn't know what it was. He said it was papers to keep us safe." Then he latched the door again. Eli closed his eyes for a moment. 3 marks. Morning, midday, night. Not just beatings, not just control. A clock, designed to break her down until she signed. Eli exhaled slowly. "We go to town at first light," he said. "You tell the sheriff the truth." Clara looked at him like she wanted to believe, but didn't know how. "What if they don't listen?" she asked. Eli didn't lie. "Then we make them," he said softly. That night, Eli sat at his kitchen table and stared at the lantern flame until it blurred. He'd fought Silas with his fists. Now he'd have to fight him with truth, and truth wasn't always welcomed in Dodge City. At dawn, they rode. Clara sat in the wagon beside Eli, hands in her lap, eyes fixed forward. The road to town felt longer than it ever had, as if the land itself was stretching to keep them from what waited. Dodge City was already awake, wagons creaking, men calling, the distant sound of a hammer on iron. But when they stepped into the sheriff's office, the air changed. Tom Callahan stood behind his desk, hat in hand. He looked at Clara, like he was trying to see if she was what the papers claimed she was. Silas stood to the side, lips split, collar stained with dried blood, eyes smug. He looked like a man who'd already decided how this would end. Tom laid the deed on the desk. "Clara," Tom said carefully, "did you sign this freely?" Clara stared at the paper. For a heartbeat, she looked like the girl in the straw again. Silent, braced. Eli didn't touch her, didn't speak for her. He just stood beside her, like a wall that didn't move. Clara lifted her chin. "No," she said. One word. "Clear." Silas's smile twitched. "She's unstable," he snapped. "She don't know what she says half the time." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Did you lock her in a stable?" Silas's jaw flexed. "That's my property." Tom's voice hardened. "That ain't an answer." Silas hesitated, just long enough. Tom looked at Eli. "You saw marks?" Eli nodded. 3 cuts on a post. Chain. Raw wrists. Tom's expression shifted into something colder. Silas took a step forward, voice rising. "You gonna take a man's daughter because she tells a sad story?" Clara turned her head slowly and looked at him. "Morning," she said quietly. Silas blinked. "Midday." His mouth opened, then closed. "Night." The room went silent. Clara's voice didn't shake. 3 times a day. He carved it. He did it so I'd stop asking questions, so I'd stop saying my mother's land was mine. Silas's eyes flared. "You ungrateful." Tom slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough." Then Tom looked at Clara again. "Did he make you sign the deed while you were locked in there?" Clara nodded once. "Yes." Tom exhaled slow. "Silas Whitfield," he said, voice like iron. "You're being held for unlawful restraint and assault, pending investigation. That deed gets set aside." Silas took a step back like the floor had moved beneath him. "You can't." Tom's hand moved toward his belt. "I can." 2 deputies moved in. Silas's eyes snapped to Eli with something like hate, but beneath it was something worse. Fear. Because men like Silas were brave when the world was quiet. They were cowards when the world looked at them too long. Silas was let out. Clara stood still. Eli watched her breathe, like she'd been holding her lungs closed for years. Outside, the story moved through Dodge City fast, through saloons and church steps, through gossip circles and storefronts. Some folks said Eli overstepped. Some said he did what any decent man should have done. Some said a daughter belonged with her father, no matter what. and some, quietly, said they'd always wondered why Silas's laughter sounded like something dying. Days passed, then weeks. The deed was reviewed, the signatures questioned, neighbors asked hard questions. Tom Callahan, to his credit, didn't let it fade. Silas tried to smear Eli in town, tried to turn it into a scandal, tried to paint Clara as a runaway seductress or a mad girl. But Clara's story didn't change, and that steadiness was its own kind of evidence. Back on Eli's ranch, Clara began to move differently, not like a woman waiting for harm, but like someone testing the world to see if it would still strike her when she stopped bracing. At first, she woke before sunrise, eyes wide, listening for bootsteps that weren't there. She counted without meaning to. Her body still lived on Silas' clock. Eli didn't ask her to forget. He just gave her new rhythms. Work, horses, fences, meals at steady hours that didn't come with a latch snapping shut. Some evenings, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, Clara would pause and go still for a second, breath catching like a prayer. Then she'd exhale and keep walking. One night, after supper, she stood on the porch, looking at the open land like it was too big to trust. "Why'd you do it?" she asked quietly. Eli leaned against the railing. He didn't say, "Because I'm a good man." He didn't say, "Because it was right." He said the truth. "Because I've walked away before," he murmured. "And it stayed with me." Clara's eyes flicked to him. "Did it change anything?" Eli stared out at the prairie, wind moving through grass like a slow tide. "It changed me," he said. Silence stretched. Then Clara spoke, softer. "I thought if I stayed quiet, he'd stop." Eli shook his head. "Men like him don't stop because you go quiet. They stop because someone stands in the doorway." Clara swallowed. "And if nobody does?" Eli's voice dropped. "Then the clock keeps ticking." She stared at the horizon, and for the first time since Eli had met her, she looked like she believed the horizon belonged to her too. Mid-story, later that week, as the tension finally began to loosen its grip, Eli said something he didn't plan. "If you like stories that take their time and don't let go easy," he said quietly, almost to himself, "stay with me. There'll be more." Clara glanced at him, confused. Eli gave a small smile, subtle, nothing forced. "Just feels like some folks need these stories," he added, and let the thought drift away like smoke. The season turned, and while Silas Whitfield waited in a cell for what the law would do with him, Clara stopped counting marks. Not because she forgot, because she didn't need the clock anymore. Some clocks aren't made of gears, they're made of fear. They're made of silence that feels safer than speaking. And fear only keeps its power when everyone agrees to look away. Eli Mercer didn't fix the world. He didn't cleanse Dodge City. He didn't erase what had been done. But he interrupted something. He stepped into a doorway and held the line long enough for a single word to be heard. No. And sometimes, out here in the dust and heat of a hard country, one steady word is how a life begins again. So let me ask you, quietly, the way the prairie asks questions without raising its voice, where in your life Are you still counting marks on a post? What fear still schedules your breathing? What memory still makes you brace at sunset? And what would happen if today you stood in the doorway for yourself? If this story stayed with you, if it settled somewhere deep and tender, subscribe. There are more waiting. Leave a comment and tell me what part you felt in your chest and what time it is where you're listening from. Because out here, across all these miles, it matters that we're not alone under the same wide sky.